Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
I knew the first laugh would not be mine, and I knew the first clink of glasses would not be for me either, because in our family attention behaves like a loyal dog that answers only one whistle, and my sister Claire has been carrying that whistle since we were kids. So when she walked into my book launch with that smile that said she had a better headline in her pocket than anything printed on the banners, I felt my stomach go calm in a way that almost scared me, because calm like that usually means I've already made my decision, and I'm done negotiating with the part of me that wants to keep the peace, and the truth is I had already decided that if she tried to turn my night into her stage, I would not argue, I would not beg, I would not compete. I would let her feel the thing she makes everyone else feel and never notices, which is the instant drop in temperature when people realize they've been used as background noise for someone else's show. She didn't even wait for the host to finish the introduction, because she never does. She just lifted her hand in this little wave that reads friendly from a distance and territorial up close, and she said, loud enough to make the person holding the mic look down at it like the battery had died, that she had big news, life-changing news, the kind of news that cannot wait until the end because it is bigger than a cake, bigger than a reading, bigger than a debut for a book I had written when she was too busy to ask what it was about, and then she said she was moving abroad for what she called a real career, and I swear I could feel a few polite nods land on my shoulders like little paperweights, keeping me from standing up to interrupt. While she explained that this was a leap into something serious, not a hobby, not a side project, not a cute dream, and that she wanted everyone to hear it here because this room was full of people who understood ambition. The old me would have jumped into the gap between her sentence and the next one with a joke, the kind of self-deprecating thing that tells the room I'm fine and asks them not to worry, not to pick sides, not to make it awkward. But I have been doing that for years, and it has cost me more than any argument ever could, because every time I smoothed it over she took another inch and called it love. So instead I drank water I didn't need and held my face still while the host tried to smile around the situation. And in that stillness a memory walked in uninvited, of Claire laughing the night I told her my first short piece had been accepted by a small journal, saying that it was adorable and asking if they paid me in stickers. And then of Thanksgiving when she performed a bit about artists who live at home in their 30s and pretend it's research, and of the time she posted a photo of my writing desk with a caption about fairy forts and make-believe, which got a lot of likes from people who never met me but felt they knew the punchline. I learned something in those years I did not know I was learning, which is that being underestimated is not just an insult, it is also an opening, because people who think you are harmless rarely check your work. And people who think you are slow rarely notice when you pass them, and people who think your plans are small rarely look closely at what is written on the line that is not meant for them. So when I finally signed the dedication and locked it, I did it with a steady hand and a quiet mind, not because I wanted to hurt her for the sake of hurting, but because I wanted one moment in my adult life where the scoreboard wasn't rewritten by whoever talked louder. I should tell you that my mother texted me the week before the launch and said, in that soft way she has when she's about to choose order over fairness, that Claire felt left out and maybe I could give her a role, like introducing me, or presenting the cake, or leading a toast, because family is family and this is a big night for all of us, and I typed out a message about how many times I had already stepped aside and how many times she had watched me do it. Then I deleted it, because nobody changes their mind because you finally explain yourself perfectly. They change because something lands, and explanations rarely land when people benefit from not hearing them. So I just told Mom not to worry, that everything was handled, which it was, in a way she would not understand until the room went silent at a very specific page. Claire kept talking, describing the city she was moving to and the title she would have and how this was a step up, a real step, the kind you put on a timeline, and I could see a few guests trying to be kind about it by clapping at the wrong moments, and a few others avoiding my eyes because they did not want to be seen feeling sorry for me, and maybe I should have felt the heat of humiliation creep up, but it didn't, not this time, because I had already done the hardest part weeks ago when I chose to stop arguing with her narrative and start telling my own, and that choice was tucked into the front matter of a book that had outlived every eye roll and every joke and every practical suggestion to go get a stable job and write on weekends. As if the people who build weekends do not deserve credit for what happens on Mondays. When she finally wrapped up, she gave me a hug that felt like a pat on the head, and she whispered that she hoped I understood this was big, and that she was happy for me too, and I whispered back that I was happy for us both, and for once I meant it. Because what was about to happen would be a gift to me and a lesson for her, and maybe that sounds harsh, but if you have ever been applauding someone who is standing on your shoulders, you know that letting go is not cruelty, it's gravity doing its job. The host cleared his throat, thanked Claire, and said we would begin with the part he loved most when he opens a new book, the line that tells you who the writer is speaking to when nobody is interrupting them. And he said that in honor of the occasion, he would read the dedication aloud so everyone could hear it together, which was a tradition he had just invented on the spot because I had asked him to invent it. And as he opened the book and rested a finger on that small square of text I had weighed every word inside, I looked at my sister and smiled, not the kind of smile she wears when she wins before the game starts, but the kind that says the game is different now, and the whistle is broken, and I don't need to speak to be heard. I just need to let her read. People love to imagine that the big turn happens in a room full of faces and clapping and someone holding a microphone, but the honest truth is that the real turn usually happens alone, on a weekday evening with stale coffee and too many open tabs. When you decide that you are done asking for permission to take yourself seriously and you begin to write as if nobody who dismisses you is ever going to read it, which is exactly where I was months before the launch when the publisher sent over the final pass and asked whether I wanted to add anything to the front matter, acknowledgments, permissions, dedication. Small things that most readers skim, but that live forever in the spine of a book and do not ask the room for attention because they already have it every time someone opens to that page and breathes in the first words. And I remember sitting there with the cursor blinking after the word for and feeling that steady calm again. Not cruel, not vindictive, just a cold line of clarity. That said, if I wanted out of the pattern, I would have to name it with the kind of care that cannot be argued away. I had spent years earning the habit of swallowing my wins before they made noise, years of calling my own milestones cute so that nobody else would weaponize the word, years of watching Claire market herself like a startup pitch while I tried to make sure no one felt threatened by the fact that I wanted something big, and while I could tell you a highlight reel of patronizing moments that would make you shake your head and say poor you, I would rather admit the part that stings more, which is that I helped her do it by laughing along, by offering the line that made her bit land better, by playing the role of the good sport, because it always felt easier in the moment to be a punchline than to be called difficult. And if you recognize yourself in that sentence, then you know why this dedication mattered more than a speech ever could, since a speech can be interrupted, argued with, talked over, or written off as drama, while a line in a book becomes a fixed star in a small sky that you built. So I started drafting versions, one that was too angry and sounded like a bad breakup message, one that was too soft and read like a greeting card sent by a person who does not mean it but wants credit for being gracious, one that reached for metaphors because I was tired and wanted an easy dressing for a hard feeling, and then finally the version that felt like standing up straight in a room you paid to rent. A few sentences that did not insult her intelligence and did not flatter it either. That named the specific shadow she had cast while thanking the light that forced me to grow around it, that used examples she would recognize, but kept them wrapped just enough that only people close to us could decode the story. Because the point was not to humiliate her in front of strangers, the point was to place the weight where it belonged and stop carrying it for her. You should know I ran it by exactly 3 people, not because I needed validation on the content, but because I wanted to hear it spoken in different voices to make sure it did not wobble into petty, and those 3 readings told me what I needed, which was that the words landed with a quiet thud rather than a splash, and that even the friend who is always the first to warn me when I am about to make a mess sat back afterward and said this is not a mess, this is a boundary written in ink, and once those lines were set, I locked the file and told the editor to go ahead, no changes, and then I did the most important part of the plan, which was to shut up and work, because revenge that announces itself becomes performance. And performance is Claire's home field, while patience is mine. During those months, I kept writing and kept dodging the small comments that still found their way to me. The ones about how Claire was lining up interviews with impressive people while I was sitting with imaginary ones. The ones about how maybe after the launch I would consider a normal job to relieve the pressure on the family budget. The ones that masqueraded as concern, but always ended with the suggestion that I take up less space. And I am not proud of this, but it is true that a part of me waited for her to do something unmissable at the event, because if there is one thing that has tripped me up in the past, it is my habit of hoping she will behave differently so that I do not have to be the one who changed. And expecting Claire to resist an open microphone would be like expecting a cat to ignore the last warm seat in the room. So yes, I planned around her nature, not against it, and I did it without guilt. What made the whole setup elegant, and I say elegant not to be smug, but to be honest about the structure, was the fact that the dedication was not cruel on its face. It did not name her or accuse her of anything unlawful or unforgivable. It only put a mirror up with a very specific angle and asked the reader to notice the pattern of shadow and say who placed it there, and by arranging for the host to read it aloud as a way to celebrate the people who shaped the book, I gave the room permission to pause at the same syllable, which is something that never happens at family gatherings where the loudest appetite sets the pace. So even if Claire had decided to sit quietly all night, she would still have met those words in front of everyone. And even if she had brought a louder headline, the page would still have had the last word. On the day I approved the proof, I felt that same strange calm I felt when she hijacked the launch. The kind of calm that comes not from winning, but from finally refusing to play the wrong game. And when the package of author copies arrived and I opened one to that page, I read it out loud to an empty room and felt the air press back the way it does when something is finished being argued, and I smiled in a way that did not need witnesses, because it was not about the clap, it was about ending a chapter that never should have been written. And if that sounds dramatic to you, that means you have never been the person holding the family's silence so that everyone else can enjoy their noise. I sealed the box, sent the thank you emails, confirmed the reading order with the host, and said nothing to Claire when she called to brag about a new contact and to ask whether I had decided what to wear, because I did not need to teach her anything with words anymore. The lesson was already bound in boards and headed to a room she could not resist, and as I hung up the phone I looked at my calendar, saw the date circled, and felt no dread, only the light pressure of a plan that required me to show up, stand still, and allow the room to discover what it had been breathing for years without a name, which is a very particular kind of freedom that only arrives when you stop begging for it. She would not see it until the book was opened and the host began to read, and once those sentences crossed the air there would be no rewinding, no edits, no spin, only the sound of someone finally hearing themselves from the outside. And I was ready for the moment to do its work. The morning of the launch started the way most big days do in my family, not with genuine excitement or everyone rallying behind the person being celebrated, but with a strange mix of logistical chaos, unnecessary commentary, and that underlying hum of competition that we've all learned to dress up as banter. So while I was trying to focus on the schedule, making sure the books were at the venue and the host had the notes we'd agreed on, my phone kept buzzing with messages from my mother about Claire's flight being delayed and how she would still make an entrance, which she said like it was a charming personality trait instead of a pattern that has left other people's moments dented more times than I can count, and I just kept nodding along in text, telling myself that today I wasn't going to be thrown off my own timeline by her sense of timing. By the time I got to the venue, the staff were setting up the chairs, the catering team was fussing with trays, and the host was running through his opening remarks with the easy warmth of someone who doesn't yet know that an unscripted interruption is almost guaranteed. And while I should have been nervous about my reading or about whether people would connect with the book, the only thing that kept looping in my mind was the certainty that Claire would find a way to inject herself into the center of it, because history had made that a safe bet, and I had already accepted that the key to holding my ground today wasn't to stop her from trying, but to let her walk right into the moment I had built without knowing it. Guests began to trickle in, friends from my writing group, people from the local press, a few extended relatives I hadn't seen in years, and each conversation felt like a small anchor holding me steady until I saw her walk in, right on cue. Just late enough to turn heads, but not late enough to be rude, carrying herself with that polished confidence that's impressive if you don't know the mechanics behind it. The way she locks eyes with one person while speaking loudly enough for three others to catch her sentences, the way she sets the rhythm in a room without asking permission, and for a brief moment I almost forgot that I didn't have to manage her today, because my instinct has always been to anticipate her moves and adjust mine accordingly. But I reminded myself that I had already done my part weeks ago when I sealed that dedication into the final proof. She found me, hugged me in that quick, camera-friendly way that doesn't wrinkle her clothes, and told me how proud she was, though her tone carried that faintly amused edge that has always felt like she's humoring me, like this is all a cute phase she's supporting before I come around to something more practical. And then, without asking, she launched into a loud story about her upcoming relocation to another country, the details of her new position, the perks, the people she'd be working with, and how it felt so good to finally be stepping into something real, the word hanging there just long enough for people to glance at me in that quick, sympathetic way that says they caught the implication and were trying to decide if I had to. And while in the past I might have jumped in to reframe or make a joke, I just smiled and nodded, letting her enjoy the sound of her own voice. The host approached, clearly torn between starting the event as planned and not wanting to cut her off mid-sentence, and that hesitation gave her the perfect opening to announce to the whole room, I figured I'd share the news now, since everyone important is here, which landed with just enough weight to remind me why I had stopped giving her the benefit of the doubt, and I could feel the small shift in the room as people realized that my night had just been casually reframed as her pre-departure send-off, the applause for her news mixing awkwardly with the polite clapping for the actual reason we were gathered, and I stood there letting it wash over me, not because I didn't care, but because caring in the old way had cost me too much already. When she finally paused, she looped her arm through mine, pulling me toward the front as though we were co-hosts of the evening, and the host, ever the professional, used the momentum to welcome everyone officially, introducing me with kind words that felt almost fragile after the tone Claire had set, and then he said, "Before we get into the reading, I'd like to start with something special," holding up a copy of my book and flipping to the very front. And my pulse didn't quicken because I wasn't nervous. The work was already done, the trap already set, and all I had to do was stand there, steady, while he prepared to give my words their first public breath. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her glance at the page, curiosity just starting to register, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to interrupt her trajectory or soften what was coming. Because there was no way to talk over a printed page, no way to redirect the focus once the words left his mouth, no way to turn this moment into anything other than what it was meant to be, and that knowledge settled over me like armor as the room quieted. The sound of glasses being set down, and chairs creaking into stillness, everyone ready to hear who I had chosen to thank before anyone else. And as the host began to read, his voice steady and deliberate, I kept my eyes on her, not to watch for pain or humiliation, but to witness recognition when it finally arrived, because that was the point all along, not to crush her, not to out her, but to make her hear, maybe for the first time, the story she has been telling about both of us without ever realizing it was being recorded in the people we've shared, the rooms we've stood in, and now in a book she can't edit. The host's voice carried easily through the space, not loud in the way a person shouts to command attention, but steady in the way that makes you stop what you're doing, because you know the words are meant to be heard, and as he read the first line of the dedication, I felt a kind of stillness settle over the room, the kind of stillness you only notice when it's too late to move without breaking it, and in that stillness, every syllable landed exactly where I had hoped it would land months ago, when I typed them out in my small kitchen and imagined this exact moment. The phrasing was careful, precise, and crafted so that anyone without history could read it as gracious acknowledgement, while anyone who had been close enough to witness our family dynamic over the years would immediately hear the quiet weight in it, the double edge tucked behind the politeness. He read, "For the one who taught me the meaning of ambition, not by showing me what to strive for, but by making clear what I would never become, your certainty about my limits became the very reason I learned to outgrow them." I had chosen each word with the patience of someone setting a combination lock, knowing that the right sequence would open the exact door I wanted, the one she has spent her whole life guarding without realizing that the hinges were already rusted through. In the split second after those words left his mouth, I saw it. The way her practiced smile froze just enough to betray that she had heard the undertone, the way her eyes flickered toward me as if checking whether I meant it the way she thought I did, and the way she quickly looked away when she realized I was already looking right back at her. Around us, there was a ripple, not the dramatic gasp of a movie scene, but a subtle shift in posture, a few exchanged glances, the kind of quiet murmuring that isn't even audible but is felt, like a current running under the floor. And I knew that in that exact moment, more than one person in that room was replaying old conversations, old moments when they had seen her cut me down with a smile and call it encouragement. And they were realizing this was not just a line in a book but a line in the sand. Claire stayed still, her lips pressed into that faint smile people wear when they're trying to appear unaffected, but I could see the stiffness in her shoulders, the slight way her head tilted as if bracing for more. The host, oblivious to the subtext, but loving the sound of the words, read the final part for showing me the cost of silence, and for making me value my own voice enough to use it, and then closed the book with a satisfied nod, smiling at the audience like he had just shared something inspiring. A few people clapped lightly, unsure whether the moment called for applause or reflection, and I stayed perfectly still, letting the silence stretch for just long enough to make sure those who understood had time to process it before we moved on. I didn't need to see her reaction in full. The half-second pause before she joined the applause told me everything I needed to know. It's a strange thing, watching someone who has always believed themselves untouchable realize that they've been seen clearly, because it doesn't happen with theatrics or shouting. It happens in the smallest betrayals of composure, in the micro-expressions they can't quite control, in the way their eyes seem to lose their anchor for just a breath. She laughed lightly when a family friend leaned in to say the dedication was beautiful, but there was no follow-up comment from her, no self-deprecating joke, no attempt to spin it into something else. And that absence was almost more satisfying than any open confrontation could have been. As the host moved on to the planned reading from the first chapter, the energy in the room had shifted in a way that was impossible to name without acknowledging what had just happened. People leaned forward with more focus. The laughter at the lighter lines was warmer, and I noticed that for the first time that evening, Claire wasn't holding court in some corner or speaking over anyone. She was sitting quietly, hands folded in her lap, listening like any other guest. I didn't mistake it for defeat. I know her well enough to understand that she was already cataloging what had happened, already thinking about how to frame it later. But I also knew that nothing she said afterward could erase the fact that she had been handed a mirror in public and hadn't been able to look away before everyone else saw her reflection. When the reading ended and the host invited questions, she didn't raise her hand or make a comment, which for Claire is unusual to the point of suspicion, and though part of me expected her to reclaim the floor somehow before the night ended, another part of me sensed that she was still too busy replaying the dedication in her head, wondering which parts the rest of the room had truly understood. That was the brilliance of it, the uncertainty. She could never be sure who took it as a generic thank you and who caught the sting beneath it, and that uncertainty is the kind of thing that eats away more effectively than any open argument. I answered a few questions, signed a few books, and all the while I could feel her presence across the room like static, not pressing forward, not withdrawing, just there, lingering, calculating. It was almost funny how the words I had written months earlier, words she might have skimmed past in private, had turned into the one thing she couldn't escape in public, and the best part was that nobody had forced her into it. She had walked straight into the moment by being herself. When the signing line thinned and people started moving toward the refreshments, I glanced over and caught her looking at me again, not with anger, not with sadness, but with that sharp, assessing gaze she usually reserves for negotiations. And I knew she was trying to decide whether I had meant it as a personal attack or a simple truth. I didn't offer her an answer. Some questions are better left to stew. When the formal part of the evening wrapped up and the host thanked everyone for coming, there was that predictable shift in the air where people start moving toward food, drinks, and smaller conversations. The energy of the room loosening now that no one has to sit still and listen, and as I stood near the signing table watching guests flip through their fresh copies, I could sense the way certain people lingered just a little longer on the dedication page before moving on. Some giving me that knowing glance as they approached with a pen in hand, others saying nothing but signing their own name on the guest list with a kind of deliberate slowness, as if silently confirming they'd witnessed something more layered than a simple thank you. Claire, however, didn't come over to have her book signed, which I had fully expected. She has always preferred to act like she doesn't need to participate in the rituals everyone else follows, as if doing so would place her on the same level as the rest of us, and that has always been the core of her image, above it all, even when it all is happening in her honor. I noticed her making the rounds, speaking to people I knew she barely remembered, smiling tightly when they complimented me in her presence, nodding at remarks about how strong the dedication was without adding anything herself. The absence of her usual commentary was, to me, a clearer sign of impact than any outburst could have been. Claire doesn't go quiet unless something is under her skin, and the fact that she didn't try to reclaim the narrative with a quick, witty spin told me that she was still turning the words over in her head, trying to decide whether they were a direct hit or just close enough to feel like one. A few of my friends, the ones who have known the history in detail, pulled me aside to say they'd never heard me articulate it so perfectly, that the line between gratitude and confrontation was so thin in that page it might as well have been a blade. And while I smiled and thanked them, I also made sure not to gloat out loud, because victory like this isn't about rubbing it in, it's about letting the moment breathe long enough that it becomes something the other person can't forget even if they never mention it again. Every time Claire picked up that book in the future, whether to show it off or to move it out of sight, those lines would be waiting for her exactly as they had been read tonight, unchangeable and permanent in a way my spoken words could never be. At one point she approached me, not in the dramatic, storming across the room kind of way, but casually, as if she were simply making her way toward the exit and happened to cross my path, and she said, in a voice that was light but with an undercurrent she probably thought she'd hidden, that was quite a dedication. I met her eyes, nodded once, and replied, I meant every word, with the kind of calm that leaves no opening for debate. She held my gaze for a second longer, then smiled in that polite, almost diplomatic way you see in people who have just decided they'll deal with this later, and I knew in that instant there would be no blow-up tonight, no public scene, no last-minute power grab. Not because she had let it go, but because she was still working out how to carry it without showing the weight. She left earlier than I expected, her goodbyes clipped but civil, and once she was gone, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease in a way I hadn't realized was still there. The rest of the evening flowed more naturally, with genuine laughter, long conversations about the book, and the kind of warmth that comes when the person who tends to dominate the room is no longer in it. I stayed until the last guest left, helping the staff pack up, signing the final copy for someone who'd come late, and feeling a kind of satisfaction that wasn't loud or giddy, but deep and steady. The kind that comes when you've executed something exactly as you planned and it landed without a single misstep. Driving home that night, I replayed her expression in my mind, the quick freeze when the words hit, the controlled smile that followed, the silence where she would normally have filled space with her voice. And I realized that the beauty of it wasn't just in how it had unsettled her, but in how it had freed me. For years, I had been editing myself down in her presence, taking up less space so she could take up more without anyone feeling the imbalance, and tonight had been the first time I'd refused to shrink. The best part was that I hadn't had to shout or argue or explain. I had simply put the truth where everyone could see it and let her be the one to explain it to herself. I don't know if she will ever acknowledge what she heard in those sentences, and honestly, it doesn't matter. The dedication isn't going anywhere. It will live in every copy, waiting in silence for whoever opens the book next, and every time someone reads it out loud, whether to a friend, a book club, or even to her years from now when she's forgotten the sting, it will still be there, exactly as it was meant to be. She always wanted to be remembered, to leave her mark on the people around her, and now she has, though not in the way she might have imagined. And for me, that is more than enough.